another video. Today we are going to discuss about one of the Java interview questions one of my associates attended, and it was a company name was Deloitte. This is the interview question which are asked in the one round. Basically, he was selected for 38 lakhs LPA. So there were around 3 rounds. This is the first round which I am going to focus this, and I am going to share you all the important questions and all the tricky questions which were asked in the right. So let's forward. So the very first thing is like we are going to select using the hacker round. So you have to be prepared with this particular process of where candidates are shortlisted. First, selected around the coding problem. So you have to be very up to date and also try to solve a number of problems. So there might be any questions possibility of some selected Java, and then there is a coding of some solution problem is given here to the develop a solution you have to run the particular code and get out. So this kind of questions you can expect, and if you the more you try to explore and test and run solve the particular problem you are going to do. So these candidates with hacker rank is not just the hacker rank platform, there are a number of platforms like Deloitte with different games. There are other platforms as well which you are able to practice and test. You never know, like by solving those particular problems you will land in that, right? So that's the first criteria to rule out the people who are not willing to code or not that good at the code, right? So people can people are secondly, like when you are done interview process of the first coding round, then the process comes out in the technical interview process, and normally they start off with the tell me about yourself, right? So you have to explain about yourself, you have to explain about the project requirements, but majorly like what is your education background, what is your code base, actually what you have done across, like tell about that and domain and other things. So you have to be very confident, very crisp, clear, and you have to be end that particular conversation in one or two minutes so that you can come sum up everything. Secondly, like he's going to ask you about the team structure and other things, right? Basically, this is to understand whether you have worked for the last project and whether you are compatible working with the last team, right? So that's the idea to understand. Tell about like how your team is structured, who sits on the side, who sits in the floor of your right, and who is the then comes like many things I've seen like where you have to normally ask what is your tech stack, right? What is your development. So now basically at the product level it is front end, the back end, and also it is every full stack. Now these people are categorized based on your requirement and based on that this is nice, this is now, right? And basically explain what is the tech stack and then we that so here it is here this basically both and back end. Now basically the domain is quite important because most of the people are hired based on their technical domain expertise as well as the functional expertise, right? So they look to tend to hire those people who have already got knowledge of the functional knowledge about, because if you go about technical things can be learned in a short time, but business or the actual functional skills are required to be learned, right? So at the broader level, very high level, there are domains like BFSI, banking, that is retail, e-commerce, telecom, etc., right? So So you have to explain what your project is about and when this movie was about and basically what exactly you have done. So let's get started with the very first thing. Now this was the initial question, what is exactly asked. Now I've a little bit jumbled up like as and when these questions are asked, but this is not exact sequence, but yeah, this is what exactly you will definitely see in the detail in this particular, but definitely it is not in the sequence as of now, but yeah, these are the questions that you have to ask. Now what is a Spring Boot starter and its significance? Now basically it is going to be a pre-configuration or set of dependencies and the configuration that will help you set up your application, Spring Boot application basically with a very minimal setup. Okay, you don't have to do manual configuration otherwise you will get into a lot of dependencies. They are going to provide a simpler and a simpler way to integrate your features that along with the technologies that you want the REST as well and your data access layer and you want the security things to be enabled. So all these things you can enable in the Spring Boot, right? So you have to just add the current dependencies. So what is significant? It's quite easy to set up. It's quite very quick to set up. It has got the pre-configuration which you have to right, you don't have to write it all up right away. You have the extensibility feature. Then you can add some more functionality by adding some starter or custom starter as well. Consistency is going to make your application consistent dependencies because you have to set up, spend a lot of time and you will need to maintain the compatibility. Let's say if you have a web service, right? You can easily set up every web application that gets installed by default whenever there is some changes or whatever can provide it. So it will make whatever conditional configuration you set up automatically. Now, what is the Spring Boot version used on the Java side? Now, this is one of the most commonly asked question, right? Because from this, people try to judge or try to get an understanding whether you have clearly learned versions of Java and you have Spring Boot basically, not just theoretically or in-depth performance build tools to understand how to build the application, how to deploy it, etc. Right? This plays a very vital role, I would say. So it is quite important to understand what is the version state and what are the dependencies when you closely check into the Spring Boot. So the Java version and the Spring Boot version is closely tied up because these all dependencies, transition dependencies, are all linked together. So let's say an example Spring Boot 3, right? It is the minimum required for this is 7 users. So beyond that, you cannot move further. You have to do a website. So the minimum is 7. Then let's say if it is compatible to Java, right? It is also going to introduce the Java microservices, right? So you can have any of these particular versions, let's say Java microservices, Java Container Services, right? So 17 and upcoming versions, I would say. So we have some business transition to be handled, etc. Some manual configuration that has to be saved. That got earlier been replaced with a lot of technologies like Java and Java, right? So that was the major changes. Now Spring Boot 2, if you look at it, was entirely a very mature version of Java, right? Now I don't think so like many people are still on Java and Spring Boot 2, but because a lot of them have been migrated over time, it has been some days or I would say some months from the release of it, right? So there was already some security problems, so it has to be a re-architected application which can handle all these things. So generally people get updated once there is an update or whenever there is a restart of the system. So in particularly like this Spring Boot version is going to be releasing in future, right? Yeah, it was supposed to be utilizing Java SE6, but yeah, after 3 years it got updated. Now an example of we already mentioned that pre-configuration extensibility that they are introducing in the 17 Java, right? So we have some other development over there like introducing configuration for any features that you have in Java as well. So we handle it end to end. So Spring Boot version, if you see, is 3.7, right? It is going to be supporting Java 8, 11, 8.1, supporting even 9.1, right? This is quite very popular version, I would say. It is going to extend, right? So that's the details about the Java, Spring Boot, and the Java version. Now, what is authentication and authorization in Spring Security? Basically, these are the two distinct concepts and the terms which are used interrelated when you're dealing with the security aspect of your application. Okay, so the very first step or the initial step is like, you have to authenticate yourself, because unless you are not authenticated, you will not be able to access the resources, right? Or whatever you intend. So you have to identify yourself, who is this, right? So it is going to verify where this particular user is, about who is this particular system, right? So it is going to answer like, who are exactly are you, right? So you have to log, like, you have to, yeah, the details can, like, the it can expect the username, password, or any other things, but yeah, you have to match that particular details. Like, in security, you can authenticate using the authentication manager, which is going to validate the user's credential. Okay, so there are different more complexity around it, but this is the basic things which, as when it comes to authentication part, like, normally we have some username and password associated with it, right? Authorization, basically this is the second step after the authentication, because you'll not be able to go ahead without authentication, right? So this is the second step, and this is the process of, like, determining what actions, or what are the resources you are the user, which is logged in, right, is allowed to access after the authentication. So it's going to address, like, what are you allowed to do, or like what are your roles and responsibility, basically, right? Based on that, it is going to determine. Now it is going to check your right access of the specific your action you are going to perform, right? Whether you have some edit rights, you have read and edit, or you have some restricted, right? Those all things can be configured over here in Spring Security. Now authorization is typically managed, like, with the help of roles and our permissions, right? So you have the annotations like pre-authorized, secured, URL, etc., control, etc. So there we use it. So basically it's a very important topic, and this all this Spring Security revolves around it. What is solid principle? This is one of the important, and you cannot afford to miss this particular question to be prepared up, because this is a must, and I would say 10 out of 9 out of 10 is definitely asked these questions, right? So you cannot afford to leave this question, right? So basically this is a set of principles, basically in an object oriented way, which is going to help your developer, any the developer who is going to create some system or working on some model, right? It is going to make it quite easy to understand what is writing, and then also it is quite easy to maintain and extend it, right? That's what the whole crux about it, right? This principle is introduced by one of the guys, Robert Martin, and this has been widely adopted across the industries, right? In the IT domain, so in the software design, I would say. So if you look at it, the very first thing is single responsibility is definitely, if you look at this particular single responsibility, it should, when you're designing a class, it should only be designed for only one such region, and there should be only one reason to change it, right? So you cannot add everything, like, everything inside one thing, right? So that's the aspect. So each class should handle only one responsibility, basically it should, or have the only one functionality, so that multiple, if you have multiple classes, responsibility, basically it is going to be one area where it is going to affect, right? Not everywhere, right? So that's the idea about it. Open and close principle, basically these are all following the principle, or like, if you are designing some model or something like that, right? You are supposed to design it in such a way that you have to do the minimal changes, or if you are making something changes, right, it is should not impact the original or the one which is originally created. So you have to write your application that it is going to be open for extension, and actually but closed for modification. So you have to not modify the existing one, you have to extend it, and then you have to write your own version of it, right? That's the what benefit of this. Now Lisco substitution, basically this is going to be, I would say, one of the, uh, if you have a super class, basically, right, it's an object way. So this should be definitely be replaced with the object of the subclass as well, because these are all derived from the super class. So basically wherever the super class is applicable, it should definitely be allowed to have that particular term used up there. That's the benefit of it, right? So a subclass should always be in a contract or with this in the align with the superclass. So it shouldn't override the behavior in a way that is going to break your existing behavior. Now interface segregation, now this is called ISP principle. This is like it should, your client should not definitely be forced to depend on the interfaces they do not use. Now let's say if you take at the high level, right, you have a very big interfaces created, a lot of methods and other features has been added, but for the person who is going to implement it, it is of no use for all this particular thing, right? So try to create a specific and also intended, which are client is going to specifically use it, so that unnecessary there isn't need to have to override such things, and actually that should not be a complexity for them. We have to design in such way. Dependency inversion, basically this is one of the high level modules. Basically it is not going to depend on the low level. Basically it should be dependent completely on the abstraction. So instead of hard coding something in the dependencies, or you're going to use some abstraction of the interfaces at the high level, that is going to make your code quite flexible and easier to test, basically. Okay. So what is the benefit of this? Like, there's a lot of, improved code readability. You have a better maintainability. You have much enhanced flexibility of, modifying something or creating an existing functionality. You have a reusable components. Now, what will happen if it doesn't override the hash code and the equals? Now, this is one of the basics, and I would say this is bare basic, I would say. So you have to definitely get this nailed up, right? So you have to well prepared, like it should be on the tip of the finger, right? So this answer should be right. So what happens is that if you don't override this particular two equals and hash code, which is part of the object class, right, that the default implementation object is going to be taken care of by the object class, right, which is there, but it is going to behave differently. Yeah, so we'll discuss, like what is the default implementation is like. The default equals method, whatever it is there, right, in the object class, it is going to only compare the memory address, the reference, meaning it is only going to check out the 2 points which the referencing point of the same object in the same. It is not going to check the actual content, right? So you have to write your own logic over that to check the content as well. So what if you don't write? The impact is that you have to only rely on the equals, and it can also be not going to consider the equality under the attributes, whatever it is there. So there is always a possibility, or there is always a chance of maximum chance that it is not going to end up comparing the equals, and then you're not going to find it, so you will definitely fall short of that. So default hash code implementation, now this is another method which is part of it, and this is it is going to, basically it is going to return some hash code, basically, which is going to be derived from, like where this particular memory address, that particular object is stored up, and after, based on that, then the hash code is calculated. So the different objects is likely to have that particular different hash codes, right? So that's a possibility, but the problem is, like, if you're not going to override it and you have your implementation, then there will be a problem with when you're dealing with hash set, hash map, and hash set, which are going to solely depend on the hash code, and then efficiency, like they are made for the purpose of being efficient search and insertion, right? So that's this has to be, I would say, considered, and like checked that you have to implement that. So make sure you do that particular implementation, right? Now when you say you're overriding, right, so there is a consistency in place, right? So if you want to uh, compare two objects based on their contents, right, so you doesn't have to, you need to override your equality and hash code. So this is especially to the objects where there are a lot of when you're using collections and all, also it's a quite big humongous, I would say, object, right? So you have to, it gives you a consistency across the system. Now there is always a contract. Now you must already be knowing that if you override equals method, then you definitely had to override the hash code method. So it is going to maintain the consistency across these two, because if you override one thing and you doesn't override one thing, that is no meaning, like definitely there is a possibility of duplicacy, or your object going with no notice, right? So that's the benefit of using these things. So not overriding the equals, it will definitely going to read, was the problem with the equality check, and the certain, there will be a different behavior. Now what is the time complexity of the hash map? Now this is one of the, I would say, not generally people are not well prepared on it, because they focus on like what is the internal working of it, or what is the internal data structure using. But definitely along with that, people who are experienced, right, they try to check out like they are in depth having this particular knowledge. Now basically when it comes to complexity, it is going to be generally the the performance of this particular application is the your collection is judged how it is being when you are going to perform some read operation, or write operation, or basically then the object the hash code, any collection is filled up, how it is going to be restructured, or reframe it, right? So that's the time complexity which is related to it is been asked. So the average, like basically what exactly is that, if you look at the very average parts, right? So the insertion part is basically, let's say you're putting in something inside, so it is O of one, right? Now you're going to look up or get something, so O of one basically. So deletion basically O of one, right? These are constant because the time because the hash code of the key is directly going to have the corresponding bucket on it, right? So now based on the worst case, right? So that now we already discussed the best possible or the average, I would say. But basically when it comes to the worst thing, it can be insertion can turn around to O of n, lookup can be around to O of n, the deletion also can also be done as an O of n. This might happen when there are too much hash code with the same buckets which are going to be stored up, right? And there is no proper implementation as well, right? Right, so that's what the disadvantage, I would say. So try to be mindful about this. Now, what are the changes after the Java 18 hash map? Now, this is a slightly, second question or third question version, right? Or the sequence of the counter question after, like, generally what is the hash map, or like what is the internal working. Then after this particular question is asked, like, what are the new features has been added as part of the Java 8. Now, you don't directly, in many interviews expect this directly, but yeah, this is quite important because this it got to the point of exact thing, right? So there are many several changes which has been introduced with the part of the hash mob, which is is going not only to improve your performance but also the efficiency, right? So basically you are in the cases of high hash collation, this is quite efficient, I would say, or optimized. So let's look at this, like we have tree based bucket for the hash collision, right? So before Java 8, the keys has to be hashed up to the same bucket, right? Which is going to be the hash collision, right? Now entries were stored in the linked list within the bucket basically. So this could definitely degrade your performance when to O of n for the lookup, right? When you're trying to a lot of objects has been already been inserted and you're trying to look up, right? So that's lookup and the insertion and the deletion, right? So this was quite degraded performance. Now, but after Java 8, the based on the number of entries in the bucket, if it is going to exceed certain thresholds, so it is the by default is 8 actually, but yeah, if it is going to exceed that, the hash map is automatically going to switch from linked list, the base one, to the balanced, that is called the red black tree. So this is going to be much reduce about the worst case part what we already discussed, right? The time complexity also be quite increased, and then it will based off the collision is going to be from the ONN to O of log n. So making it operational is much more efficient in terms of when there is a heavy collision. So there is a support for lambda expression as well. Now earlier, like we does not have this particular basics method manipulating like port types and that, but it did not support your functional aspect of the programming, right? Like how lambdas are supporting it, right? So that's what the disadvantage. But now when it comes to HashMap with along with the Java 8, right? So we have for is replace all, compute if it absent, so which is quite supportive. I would say so it's going to support the lambda expression and the functional style, right? So this makes operation on the map much more concise and expressive, right? So that's the benefit. Now compute, like if you if absent or compute if present method, so this going to be had to manually check if if they exist. This method is going to check that if it exists, or we have to insert accordingly, right? But after it, compute if present has been and compute if present were introduced, basically this is going to save your time, and it is going to make your operation much more concise and efficient, right? So it is going to check that particular compute and insert, right? uh, Also there is also changes in the merge related things, right? And we have two merges. But prior to that, when you want to merge something in the hash map, right, it was a quite manual process and checking the conditions, right? But after that, in after the Java 8, there has been, as it is quite simple for merging the values, right? So the combination combines the value for the given key, basically, I would say. So you have to define, and then we have to merge those particular things, right? So that's the aspect of it. A replace all method, this also has got some modification aspect of the values. Now it is literally going to manually iterate over each entries, I would say. Okay, map entries. But replace all, which has come as a savior, and it is got introduced in part of the function, which is going to give you functions to allow you to all the values in the map to be replaced all, right? So that's the benefit. Now, what is comparator and comparable? Basically, this is when you want to have your natural sorting order, or or let's say when you're dealing with an objects, right? So you have to sort them on certain basis, like whether it is has to be a natural or whether it has to be based on the custom logic, right? So those all with respect to the custom sorting order or the natural sorting order, these two interfaces are closely associated or related to it. Comparable, when you compare, right? So it is going to be quite natural, and it is going to only be ordering based on the natural ordering order, right? But when it comes to comparator, you can define your own external configuration ordering, which can be quite customized. In comparable, we have comparative method, but in the comparator we have comparator. This is one of the basic difference, because where one it is going to compare with the current object, and one is going to compare with the two different objects, right? So that's the difference. Now when the object has a natural ordering, it is going to be like let's say age or name, right? So we are going to use it over there. But when you want your multiple sorting criteria, or you cannot modify the existing class, right? So in that case, you make use of this particular comparator. Now let's say you wanted to modify something in the class, and then you wanted to implement that comparable. That's what comparable does. But comparator, it doesn't allow you to modify the existing class. You can actually write your logic externally. Now there are multiple sorts. When you compare with the comparable, it is going to have only one single natural in order. But you can, in comparator, you can define multiple of them, right? So let's say when we'll discuss about when to use this, basically. So whenever you want to define some single or a natural way of an object to be sorted, let's say your employee is to be sorted based on the ID, or a single attribute is there, right? So only there is no much complexity of multiple criteria has been added. There we can use. But when it comes to be multiple as attributes, you have to compare, and then do that certain different criteria, then we can have to we cannot make use of the comparable, because it's a straightforward thing. But in comparator, with the compare method, is going to compare the two objects, and you can implement the logic. Now what is finally and the finalize? Now this is quite old, and I would say since ages this particular question is asked, but I've never seen like hardly like the interview happens like this particular question is not asked, right? So don't ignore this particular question, I would say. Now I would say these are all distinct concepts, which is going to be having their own different purposes. But yeah, if you go take care of the final keyword, right, it's a keyword which is applicable for class, method, right, variables, etc. But yeah, this is going to prevent something which has to be once it is assigned something, or once you write that, you cannot have that particular overridden, or something new values cannot be assigned. So let's say you're dealing with final variable, right? So the once that value is declared, and you have that particular value assigned it, you cannot change it whatever if it is after initialize. So basically it is used in the context of the constants. Let's say we have strings, you have some integer or value, some float, some with the default thing, which is not I would say not coming from the database, or not coming not, I mean this can be maintained, right? That is maintained over here. So we have a final method as well, where we can define a declare a method. Basically you cannot override in a subclass, right? So say, when you're dealing with parent child things, you cannot do this. Now final class, basically I would say this cannot be subclassed. Now you will not have an authority, or your compiler will throw an error when you're trying to compile it. So this is often is going to prevent inheritance of the classes, right? So that's the benefit. Now finally, if you are going to look on the block, right, so basically this is going to be part of the exception handling category, where you want certain code to be executed after let's say you have implemented your try logic inside it. Now you want certain code to be executed in certain logic, right? So you write that particular in the finally block, where it will be definitely going to be executed. Now typically we are going to use some certain cleanup resources, like closing some files, some we have to release some resources, etc. So that's what we write in that particular thing ideally. So it's a part of the exceptional handling, right? It is going to be always executed after the try block. And the let's say if there is no exception, right, so it is going to be after the try block, definitely it is going to be finally block which is going to be executed. And let's say if there is an exception as well, right, so it is not it is going to skip the rest of the try block. It is going to call the catch method. Unless your application is hard stop, your finally block will be definitely executed. Okay, so that's the benefit of what it, right now it will run this particular code. Now what is finalize method? Now basically if you see, right, it is going to be uh, when you are writing some cleanup activities, right, you want to do some cleanup activities on an object, right, so which has to be garbage collected. So that's where we make use of this finalize method. Now this is method is part of the object class, and basically any class which is going to override this particular method is going to contribute for releasing their own resources, like closing it, you have some database connection or releasing some network connection, etc. Although it is always mentioned that it is, although you have a provision to call, but that is not always going to be the case, where you are going to be in the moment you call it in the garbage collection is triggered. So basically there is no guarantee, I would say. So you can only call it and then hand it over to the JVM to call up. So that's what the important, like with respect to the final. Now what is class loader? And basically it is types, right? Now class loader is nothing but in the Java runtime environment, where you are trying to load certain classes into a memory, so that when it is going to run your application, it has got the minimum memory necessary things which can be environment or a support for that particular application to be run up, right? So during the execution of program, it is going to be loaded that particular class loader. So your class is going to be part of some integral, as a whole ecosystem. If you look at part of the Java runtime program, but it's basically going to load some classes from various different locations, like what is the file, what is the network location, or some a memory basically. So it is going to be all the pre-classes which is going to be started. Now if you look at the key functionality of class loader, right, it's purposely used to it is used for your finding some binary data, that is usually a class ideally. But and it is going to convert it into your normal class Java object. So basically it is going to load it and then convert it into the understandable way. It is going to make use of the delegation model. That is class loaders are in the delegation model, where one class loader is going to delegate to the another class loader if it is not going to find that particular class. So this is done in a hierarchical manner. Okay, so we have some namespace management as well, like there are different the class loader, which is definitely going to ensure that the classes from the different sources have no conflict in maintaining separate namespace or any for each of this particular class loader basically, right? So we have three basically the class loader. The one is bootstrap. So this is the parent, I would say, one at the top of it, of the class loader. So it is responsible for loading the the core packages, I would say, basically, which is part of the JDK itself. Okay, so the location is basically JRE lib, and normally it contains jar files, or it can also contain classes. But yeah, Now what is the responsibility? It cannot be customized or replaced it, so it has to be done, right? So the string class and the other classes are loaded from the bootstrap itself, so that's the how it is been loaded because it's part of the JRE library. Now when you're dealing with the extension class loader, now this is the class loader which is going to load your classes which are there in the JRE lib extension directory. Okay, and there might be any custom directory which you already mentioned, but yeah, basically it loads the library as a part of the Java extension mechanism, right? So that's the extension class loader. So now classes which are there in the extension directory or the classes or the jar which are there in that particular class loader, it is going to be loaded there. Let's say just for an example, Java X packages like Swing is there, Servlet is there. These are all loaded by the part of extension class loader. Now, when you look at the system class loader, now this is one of the I would say in the hierarchy, it is a default class loader basically. So it is going to load your basically the in the class path whatever your application is going to run. So it is going to load all the classes from the directory or whatever jar is present in that particular classes, and it also looked out for the environment variable and thing it is going to load it. So typically any low classes which are there located in the application like jar files or the directory or which is specified in the class path, right? That can be loaded from that particular location. If you have a custom classes or a third party library, we have to definitely it starts from the system class loader for these particular classes. Now we can also define a custom class loader. You can create your own by extending the class loader class, and you have to override one of the method that is find class basically. Now class loader basically when there is a need to load your classes from the non-standard locations or the sources, like we have some database or we have to connect to the network or we have some encryption system over there. That's the way around. Now you might also create some class loader to load from the different custom locations, network, etc. So be mindful about it when you're using it and you're dealing with a class loader. Okay. uh, the class loading is hierarchy wise. If you see, it is going to be loaded from the parent, from the top bottom to the top, right? So ultimately it finds it, or if it is not going to find it, ultimately it is going to delegate to the next possible thing, and then it is ultimately going to throw some error, right? So ultimately at the very end, if it is not going surpass this particular class loader and it is not able to find, exception is thrown. Typically, as I mentioned, at the very high level it is bootstrap, second is extension, and then the system class loader. So the mechanism is basically is going to load your classes through the specified location, the rat is your directory, application, class path, etc. And definitely it is going to load that particular classes, and it is going to link it basically. So the verification process happen, the preparation process happen, there is a resolution inside that which is going to happen in the JVM. So apart from after that, there is an initialization process where the class is going to be initialized. Okay, so that's the thing. Now, if you consider as a key point, so the delegation model you have to consider, because first it is going to be parent first. This is going to check for the parent class loader to the class, and then it is going to find that, right? Okay. Now we have given you an example of custom class loader where you can extend the class loader. You have to override the find class method. Yeah, you have to load that particular byte stream that class into that, so it is an convertible, and then make use of it to make use of it. So that's the whole idea. Now what is the Java immutable object? I mean, what it make the Java immutable object? Now basically immutable object is nothing but you're going to make your objects, the state of that particular object freezed up, I would say. It is not going to change up. Yeah, of course, if there is a improper way of handling creating an immutable class, but it is going to be quite I would say straightforward. Now, uh, when you're dealing with immutable objects, basically the state is not going to be changed once it is created. So once you have this particular object created, fields cannot be modified. You have some objects which are particularly very, I would say, multi-threading environment. That could be inherently thread safe, meaning like they could be shared between the threads. So the key features I would say is that we have to mention all the fields are final, right? We should have the immutable object that are final fields, right? So once you have that particular object constructed, this particular fields cannot be changed. Now after that, we should not provide an indicator setter for it, so that there is no way where you can set up. Now ultimately, you have to define the classes and a final class, so that nobody is going to subclass it, and you are preventing it from being subclassed. Now, if you look at the proper way of handling the mutable object, basically there are different dates, list, array list, and everything. So there is always a possibility getting the mutable, right? So array list is quite mutable. So when you're going to modify something, it's definitely going to be modified, and that is going to impact, right? So in order to make it is an immutable with respect to the mutable object, you have to take ensure that you are writing mutable objects which are not going to be modified. So typically you have to deal with deep cloning or any of this particular construction process. This has to be followed up. So make sure you are using that particular thing. uh, Constructor initialization, basically the object state is fully initialized in the constructor. You have to make use of the constructor process. So make sure you're not rewriting something, exposing something. So all the fields and everything has to be initialized from the constructor itself. So all at once it is going to finish up the object creation process, and it will not allow you to change something. Now, what are the benefit? Basically, it is going to be thread safety. It is quite simplicity. There is going to be a maintainability of caching and hashtag hashing for it. Security wise, it's quite simple, right? So these are things which are benefit of having the immutable object. Now, what is this deserialization and serialization and deserialization? Basically, you all must be well aware. This must have been most common question. Now it's a process of converting your object into a byte stream, and then converting that, or transferring over the system, and then ultimately converting back into the object, right? So that's the high level of the both serialization and deserialization. So now if you look at the core thing what serialization, it's something, as I already mentioned, like it is going to convert into a byte stream. Now by stream, when you write it, let's say you have to write in the file, or you want to send it over the network, or you can choose to store to any database. So that's the primary, I would say, the purpose of serialization, to store something, the state of the object, so that whenever they want to recreate that particular object, they should take that particular deserialized object and create a new version of it. So how it works is basically you have to implement a serializable interface. So this is a marker interface, and it is going to make your eligible for serialization. So it is Java will treat this particular class as a different thing. This is how you deal with this particular process of, if you see the main method, there is a process of where you are writing something into the so that is .sir file, right? So you are dealing with the process of serialization where you're converting from an object to the bytes. Deserialization is reverse process where we normally converting back to the byte to the object, right? So basically it is going to receive the byte streams, and other it is going to convert it into the object. So deserialization is, I would say, read back going to be a it is going to read the byte stream, and then it is going to convert to the object, original object, basically an original object, but yeah, it has got its own things. Now this is where, like, it works, right? So it is going to be a logic where you write in the try block where you have to read that particular object. You have to first deserialize from that particular file. So that is the way. Now, if you look at this particular at the overall aspect, converting byte stream, then it is a reverse process. Uh, it is going to save the object into some state, I would say, but it is going to say from the state to the object it is created. We have some object stream to write it. We have an object input stream to write it, read it, etc. That's the process. After that, the class is going to maintain some serializable interface basically, right? Now there is no specific deserialization person where it doesn't need to check out it, but because ultimately it is going to get the object. Now, what is horizontal scaling? This is quite, I would say, important when it comes to the current interview aspect, where people are dealing with cloud. People are the IT companies are expecting people to be cloud enabled or cloud enabled skills, right? So these are all the questions which are asked in the latest, in the modern IT companies or in the recent interviews. So basically, you have to understand what is horizontal scaling and vertical scaling. These are two different aspects of scaling. Basically, it is going to ultimately increase your either capacity or the number of systems, or the load of traffic, how it is going to handle. So in a way, these two terms are working in a two different way, but ultimately they are doing the scaling part, I would say. Okay, so horizontal, exactly, it involves like we have to include more machine. Let's say you have some machine and your application is running over there, so you have to replicate that particular machine so that it is going to distribute your load, which is, let's say you have some millions of record. So now earlier it was one, now you have divided into 10, so that the load will be divided by this. So that's the approach of horizontal scaling. It is also called out as an scaling out. Now if you look at this particular um, how it work internally, basically, like you're going to upgrade your single server, you're going to add your more servers, instances, etc., so that your workload is shared basically. Okay, so if you have a large system, right, so this is going to definitely benefit you when you're coordinating with your application, and there is always a need of load balancer or distributing your system and the request. Basically, it is going to split your data and tasks across the multiple services. Now there are good way of ultimately there are some challenges, there are some coordination which you have to make use of it, right? Uh, Now, if you go to the vertical scaling, right? So basically, it involves in upgrading your existing hardware. So you are going to add some more resources to it, right? So basically, like you are increasing your CPU, RAM, your memory, so that speeds or the capacity get increased in the single machine itself. So now here, the opposite of it, like where we already discussed of adding the number of instances, here we are talking about increasing the existing server's capacity, right? So basically, you're going to increase your resources inside it. It is going to add some CPU, memory, RAM, and etc. It is ultimately going to improve the performance. Okay, that's the way out. Now, what is the Spring Bean life cycle? Now, this is one of the most underrated question, I would say, because this is quite an important aspect when it comes to spring boot bean, right? So you have a life cycle of method where it undergoes the process of starting from loading the class till initializing and then making it available to the container, right? So where the application can make use of it. So it walk you through the all the steps of creation process, ultimately not only dealing with the creation process, but you're dealing with the destruction process as well. So the spring container is liable for that part. So the very first thing is going to create your instantiate your bean creation process. So basically, after that, you'll be able to initialize it. Now, once it is actually instantiate, right? So it is going to initialize all the dependencies which are required. It is going to initialize some task occur, which is going to implement certain initialization bean interfaces, etc. So we have this post constructor which is going to specify the initialization method in the configuration basically. Now we have this particular bean usage. Basically, it is going to fully initialize it, and then it can be used in the application. Now after that, ultimately it's a process of destruction where you are trying to deload or shut down your application. It is going to unload your all resources. Is going to clean up that particular. So it is going to we have to implement the disposable interface, and then you have to annotate with the pre-destroy. Now, how do you write the test cases for your Spring Boot application? Now, this is quite important because to as for the today's developers, whether it is cloud or whether it is like any developer, it's quite important to have that particular testing capability, and whatever you are going to write, you have to be tested. Each piece of the code should be tested up. So that's the overall idea. So basically, you should be equipped with writing the test cases. Ensure that you test that particular behavior that is intended to be tested. This is quite, I would say, powerful tools are available. So we have some annotations, utilities, etc. We have certain integration frameworks as well. Like we have JUnit, we have Mockito, we have some Spring Test framework, right? So which are going to make use of that. Now, ultimately, when you're trying to create a project, ultimately the very first step is that we are going to set up the dependencies, okay, and secondly, you're going to write the unit test cases, basically. Okay. Now, if you look at this particular code, there are some services written over here. If you see, ultimately in the test case, you have written the code and you have asserted it, right? So we have assert equals method over here. Thirdly, we are going to write that particular Spring Boot test integration. So you have this particular annotation to test the integration testing. Now you're going to fully load your application context. You're going to test your multiple layer inside it, like starting from controller, services, ultimately up to the repository. Okay, data layer. So this is how you're now going to test it. If you look at this particular test method, it is going to enable that particular mock MVC. It is going to perform the lookup of that particular URL, and then it is going to expect something. So there are predefined expected things which actually where you can get that we can return the status, we can return the content, and then compare it. Fourthly, we can make use of the Mockito dependencies. Basically, these are all the dependencies which are can be used as an isolating to you want to test something, right? So basically, um, you want to test some user repository that is dependent on the user. I mean, you want to test the services, and you will be dependent on the repository, right? That's where you make use of the Mockito process, right? So that's how you write the mocking. So now if you see the mock, or like the user repository, we have inject mock. If you see right now we're going to service related thing, then ultimately it is going to run. Now with the help of the profiles, we can make use of the test specific configuration, right? We have at the red test configuration, we can define the bean, and then we are going to ultimately in the configuration, we're going to extend that within a Spring extension, and then we are going to have defined the context, configuration classes, etc., and then we can write that particular logic. So if you ultimately look at the common test, right? So we have different annotations. Basically, at the rate Spring Boot test is there, at the rate MVC web MVC test is there, at the rate JPA data test, etc. So mock bean also is there. We have a test configuration as well. Now this particular question is normally I've very in very few interviews I've seen this particular question, but these are the I would say deep questions, or I would say questions which will definitely try to sometime leave behind, like you have not been well prepared for it, right? So always never ignore any questions or any concepts which where you did think like this may not be asked, right? Interview can ask anything. So logback, log4j, log4j, these are all logging frameworks, right? Which are used with the Java application. Now they are going to serve different purposes, and they are used in a different features, right? Now first look at the SLF4j. This is going to be simple logging facade, basically, which is used for the Java, right? So basically it is ultimately it is I would say it is not a logging implementation, but is rather a kind of a facade where simply interfaces of the particular logging can be used up in a different logging implementation, like log4j, or I would say logback, or you're making use of the Java util, jul, etc. So the facade or the abstraction layer which is on top of it is going to make use of the framework. uh, that's what SLF4j. So what is the benefit is that it is going to allow decoupling your logging framework and the implementation. Now it has got quite flexibility when you're in terms of dealing with the changing. You can definitely switch with multiple logging frameworks. Basically, I would say Log4j. Basically, this is one of the Apache's Log4j. You have one version, we have two versions. Now this is one of the popular thing, I would say, and it has been widely used. Okay, majorly, like Log4j is basically as a full framework for logging, right? It is going to be provide you some options. It's going to include some logging levels, etc. Right, and also we have some formats, appenders, a distinction, out like different output destinations, etc. So when you compare with 1x to 2x, 1x has been quite old, and it is, of course, it is still in use, but no longer actively maintained. There is no support being done for it. But Log4j2, basically it is replaced with the Java 1x version, but has got a better performance. It has got new features. It is going to be it's currently being maintained. Okay, so that's the benefit, and it is highly configurable. It is highly having have a high performance, basically, and it is quite rich in features, right? So we have some custom formats, we have some certain filtration, etc. Logback. Now this is one of the logging framework which was definitely created by the founder of the Log4j, but basically, yeah, it can be considered as a Log4j, and it is successor of a Log4j. Basically, it is now in the Spring Boot application. It is one of the default framework which is used internally. Okay, now if you look at it, right, the important features are configuration. We have asynchronous logging, we have some automatic rollback features enabled in it, right? So that's the benefit of making use of it. Now, let's say if you want to secure your Spring Boot application, what are the control measures you will take care before making your application secure? Now, Spring Boot, as we already discussed, there are two aspects of authentication and authorization. Now, when you're dealing with multiple measures, like measurement, like we have some sensitive data, we want to prevent some unauthorized access by the hackers, and we want to maintain our integrity of our application. So we can make use of this particular control measure so that your application is quite secure. First of all, what you have to do is that the Spring security, right? Make use of that, and then under that you have to implement the authorization and the authentication part. So we can make use of that. We can implement making use of the user authentication by the username, password, or we can make use of the provider, like or we can make use of the JWT, right? So basic authentication related thing, actually in Spring security we have some things which can be authenticated for the REST API or based on the web application. We can make use of OAuth2, as I mentioned. So basically it's an application, or you can also make it in combination with Open Connect. Basically this is going to support your authentication mechanism, and you can also integrate with the services like Google is there, Facebook is there. You can also create your own custom identity provider also. That's a huge advantage, I would say, and you can design it according to yours. JWT, basically it's a web-based token. Now it is going to be a status authentication. Basically now, after you are successfully logged in, right? So the token has to be returned, so that the subsequent request, it is going to be handed over to the calling method. It is going to be, the token has to be handed over, so that you can call in the next and identify what exactly it is, right? Authorization framework, we have control to the resources based on the roles of the permission, basically. Now we have at the rate pre-authorized, we have at the rate secured, etc., and other things, right? So that's the benefit. Now if you need to secure your Spring Boot application, as we already discussed, right? It is going to be basic authentication related thing. If you see under the configure method, we have a role, we have defined users, etc., and then we have HTTP basic authentication where we have defined, right? Now we have another configuration method where we have defined the username and password over there, right? So now we can also make use of HTTPS, basically the secure version. So basically it is going to the data which is going to be transmitted between the client and server is encrypted, and there is no, it is quite secure. So basically you have to configure your SSL in a Spring Boot application, either in your application.properties or application.ynm basically. Okay, so in order to enable your SSL, you have to have certain configurations defined over here, like an SSL enabled. You have to define the keystroke, yes, keystore, and etc. related things, and then ultimately, you have to go, define the password policies. Now you are in the at the rate configuration. You can define your encoder, I would say. Now, what is the preventing the cross site scripting? Basically, this is when an attacker is going to attack the with the help of the malicious script is going to attack the trusted website basically. So you can mitigate this particular risk by first validating it, and then you have to sanitize your input. We have that particular encoding the output, so that it's avoid your executing untrusted for the untrusted data basically. Now we can make use of the content security policy in the header to restrict the execution of the script. We can make use of the HTTP header security policy, that which can enforce that CSP, now content security policy. Now, cross security forgery, I would say, cross site say request forgery. This is one of the protection, I would say. So this particular attack is going to involve in tricking the user with into performing some unwanted actions basically. Let's say you have defining some speaker enability, right, with the help of the CS arrays of protection, which is not disable unless absolutely necessary. You have to mention that this is not disabled. Okay, so you need to make use of this particular thing. Now, security headers, these are quite important because it gives you protection against various type of HTTP. Security is going to prevent certain type of attacks basically. Let's say you added it, like X content is there, X framework is there, sticks HSTST basically, or XSS protection, etc., which you can define in that, and then you can have your implementation. So under this particular thing, we could have defined that. Okay. Role based access control, basically this is quite important, I would say, and it has to be implemented based on the access control role based one, so to ensure that it is only intended resource or the access reside can be authorized, I would say. So the Spring security, basically the roles and the permissions are going to be specific endpoints or a service method basically. We can make use of it. Logging sensitive information basically. This has to be carefully locked up, like some password is there, credit card is there, other personal information, right? So you should avoid using the sensitive data, so be mindful about it. Database security, basically, like we can make use of the parameterize, we can make use of the JPQL. We can to prevent some SQL injection attack. You have to secure your database with a strong authentication. You have to restrict some IPs which are not under your IP or subnet. We have to limit our exposure to the rate limiting. So we have provision of rate limiting where your service is not overloaded or by the hacker, right? It is going to prevent your excessive calls basically. We have to keep update your dependencies as and when there are new version being updated, and there are libraries available. So this is the vulnerabilities which are which are present in the libraries, which are compromised, right, which will provide hackers as a way out to hack your system. So you should always try to see, like whether any update happened there. Monitor your always try to monitor your log if there is a certain behavior, or somebody is trying to log in or fail. There are number of failed attempts, like which are suddenly increased. We have some certain, I would say, sensitive data which are in that particular system. So make use of this and then do it. Now, what is Kafka and Rabbit? Now, this is quite, I would say, when in terms of event-driven architecture, we are make use of this particular frameworks. One is Kafka and one is RabbitMQ. Now, they both are used for the different purpose, but yeah, ultimately we discuss the use cases. The high level, it is an Kafka. If you go it right, it's an event streaming platform. So So you want some real analytics like logs, aggregation, right, etc. We use that. But RabbitMQ, this is going to be a task related queries. Let's say you want some workload to be distributed, some you want some real time messaging to be done. In that case, we use. Now architecture wise, for Kafka V, it is distributed things like it is going to enable the event streaming platform with some different topic, I would say, partition. But with RabbitMQ, there is only a bro message broker like with a queue and the exchanges basically. Now we have a message retention rate. Basically, these are with respect to Kafka, these are the messages what has come, right, are stored in some for the configuration and retention time basically. But RabbitMQ, it is going to be removed after immediately it is been consumed, unless this it is kept as an persistent basically. Now, in terms of performance, we high level throughput, we make use of the Kafka is designed for high throughput basically. So large applications which are going to use it is good for them basically. Now, but let's say you want some application as a low latency, it is where you are using some small or a medium application. This particular RabbitMQ is quite useful. Now ordering basically, so the in Kafka the ordering is quite preserved, I would say, okay, in the partition. But in RabbitMQ, it is maintained under the queues. Now, scalability wise, it is highly scalable. It is partition based. RabbitMQ is of course scalable, but that is the mode of clustered and federation structure wise. Now, durability basically it is quite persistent. It is disabled based on the highly configurable, but RabbitMQ it has got an optional feature of like based on the message persistence setting basically. Now Kafka protocol basically there are some protocol you can define under the Kafka. Now we also have this AMQ, which is one of the advanced messaging queuing protocol in terms of RabbitMQ. But let's say you are integrating, right? So we have streaming, which are going to process certain big data, or like you're dealing with microservices or connectors, etc. So but in RabbitMQ, it is your AQ, AMQ, or MQTT or Storm basically, which are used as an integration. Now, Kafka is like I would say quite steeper when you're going to learn this particular as a learning curve, right? So it is much more complex setup. But RabbitMQ is quite easy to set up. Now, what is rate limiter? Now, we already discussed when you're dealing with the microservices and like if you want to limit your certain request which is to be landed on your application in a certain duration, we make use of it. So that's the high level I would say. So whenever the request is going to be or any operation has to be performed and a certain specific period time, we make use of it. So basically, the software systems it is going to protect your basically the services of the application when there is an overwhelming request which are landed on the services. So it is not only going to prevent your system to be abusive, prevent you from abusing you from the overloading as well. It is going to ensure there is a fair distribution of the resources, etc. So rate limiting is quite useful, and it is useful when you are dealing with the API web servers or you are dealing with the microservices. So excessive traffic will be stopped. Uh, so we have some DOS attack as well, right? Now service outage, security risk, etc. So this will prevent such traffics. How it is going to work is that basically it is going to definitely control the number of requests or user or the services which is going to let's say in certain time frame, let's say in a certain time, let's say this you can configure it, let's say it's 100 requests under 1 minute. So you can define those particular thing and then do that. But if it is exceeding, then it is going to trigger the it is going to be blocked up or it is going to throttle basically until that the next time the period starts, right? That's the benefit. Now if you look at it, right, so common logging rating algorithms, there are different token bucket algorithm, leaky bucket algorithm, we have fixed window counter, sliding window log. Now when you're using like rate limiting, right, so it is going to be implemented in different layers basically, right? So at the API level layer you can implement it, you can backend services you can implement, at the infrastructure that is like API gateway you can implement this, right? These are the common, I would say, ways or method to implement the rate limiter. So first is like we have to rate limitize our application in the Spring Boot, right? So there are different ways to implement it. So you can use bucket 4j. We have resilience 4j. We can also have our own implementation of the filter in the mechanism. So let's say we are using the resilience 4j, right? So it is going to provide the rate limiter module, and it is seamlessly integrated with the Spring Boot. Okay, so let's say you added the rate resilience 4j, right, with the version. Now if you see, you are going to configure at the rate configuration. Now if you define under this particular custom rate limiter configuration the number of limiting of that period, during that time, the limit refresh period, there's a timeout duration, etc. We configure that. Once you configure this, you can, at the control level, you can integrate with the Spring AOP related thing. So in the service level, if you see here, we are going to return that, or we are going to call that particular exception like rate limited exception if there is something it is going to exceed, right? So we have to check the permission related things. Now with the bucket 4j, ultimately this is not very much, but mostly we use a resilience 4j. But yeah, this is how it is implemented in the bucket 4j. uh, in the rate limiting API in the gateway. Basically, as I mentioned, in the gateway also it is applicable. Like we have the API gateways like Kong, AWS API gateway, Nginx is there, Spring Cloud gateway is there, which is quite configurable, where you can define the rate limiting directly inside that particular gateway layer. So it is not only going to prevent your microservices or any other backend services basically. So this is how, like if you see at the YML file, we have some rate limited things defined in it. Okay, we have this replenish rate, which is token basically added. We have some brush capacity, which is defined with the maximum burst of the traffic allowed. Rate limiting, like with the help of the radius. Now there are, as I mentioned, there are different ways, but yeah, like using different distributed system, right? So it is going to be radius as stored in the common as an approach. So basically, these are the commands like in or expire, which is going to implement your rate limiting capability. Okay, and you can actually programmatically check like the counter, and then you can actually with the help of the template you can write your let's say it is going to expire in certain time, right? That is right. Or also you can, in the, if the counter is exceeding 100, then it is going to only allow certain below that, right? If it is above that, it is not going to allow. Now what is GraphQL and what is the difference between the REST API? This is one of the hot topic. I would say this is the must topic where you have to be prepared up. Now before going to like what is the difference, right? So the point is like it's quite the GraphQL, if you see, right, it's a query language basically designed for the APIs. Now in the runtime, you're trying to execute certain queries, right? We make use of the system, right? The type system, we define the data inside it. So basically, this was generally developed by the Facebook, and it was as an open source in 2015. Now what exactly GraphQL does is that it is going to allow the client to request what exactly it is required. So it is not going to return every attribute or every JSON around it, right? So it only the things which are required. So in the endpoint, when you're trying to have a single endpoint, but let's say you want some 10 different things to be retrieved, right? So you can actually define your in the single API itself, like these all things are required in it. So it's quite flexible. It's quite either single entry point on endpoint only. All your multiple endpoints can be taken up. It is type based basically. It is real-time data, this can be done. There's a versionless API, so that it doesn't have to specifically do that, so it is going to avoid some versioning as well need of it. This is the basic difference, I would say. But yeah, uh, if you look at this, like which while fetching, right, so it is going to be specifically exactly what the data is needed, like much more fine grained data, I would say. But REST API in general, it is a fixed structure. Whatever you define, it is going to be a respond. So that is like there is a possibility, highly possibility, that you are overfetching something, or you're trying to underfetch something, or you have to. There is always a need of second API called up, or something like that. Okay. So these are the differences, I would say. So please have a look at it. I hope this video was helpful to you, and I have prepared this, with much efforts, gathering the information from the real interview questions. I've asked multiple people. Like, I'm trying to gather all this information so that you are well prepared with the interview, so that you can clear those. Although I will be publishing later some more videos, many more videos about it, as and when I get these particular questionnaires, and myself, if I'm attending the interviews. So I hope this video was quite helpful. It gave you an insight of the real interview questions. If this video was helpful, please share it with the needy people who are already looking out for this particular kind of videos. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon.